Hey everybody, how's it going tonight? Welcome. Welcome to tonight's webinar. Big conversation tonight, big topic about aftercare and figuring the ins and outs of it all. So thanks for joining. My name is Stansbury. I'm a family therapist for Open Sky, and I've worked Open Sky for quite a few years now, all the way from as a field guide to as a family therapist to a group therapist. So I have pretty good range as far as what aftercare looks like in the field and out of the field, and how to hopefully share some insight with you guys to make it a little easier the choice. So tonight we'll be talking about a whole handful of things, and feel free to grab a piece of paper and a pen if you'd like, just for some notes if you need so. And then maybe a couple of topics on here, a couple of lines you might want to scribble down just for some consideration later on. Also, you can always go back and resource the webinar later on if you want to do some review. You're welcome to do that too. Let's get started here. Okay, here's the agenda for the evening. One thing too, just wanted to offer up that any questions that pop up, please feel free to write in. Maury is helping out this evening, and she'll be able to look at those and try to feed them to me as I have time. So anything that comes up, please feel free to write in, and I'll do my best to answer them. Tonight we're going to be talking about a whole handful of things. The concept of continuum of care, the timing around aftercare, talking about education consultants and kind of their role and how they can best serve you and help you with making the decisions that need to be done. We're going to look a little bit at the spectrum of choices. What is from A to Z, kind of like the different handful of programs you can choose from as far as the category goes, and just some concepts around that too, a little education around that. A whole handful of factors to consider, also that your therapist try to kind of insiders look at what does the therapist think of when making a recommendation for aftercare and why, and also for you to have that information too. If they're just that easy, just a handful of other things to look at, some other choices and factors to consider through this whole thing, and then of course ultimately how to incorporate your student, how to incorporate your child in this process, and some factors with that. So yeah, here we go. Okay, great. So one analogy we often use in this world with wilderness therapy and therapy in general is this ICU concept. Often it's using the kind of medical model of describing treatment and medical model describing what we're really doing here. So in this setting, something's going on at home. It's a pretty acute situation. Maybe there's a crisis at home, or a series of crises that have been happening, and finally you've drawn a line, or your child's come to you saying, hey, I need some more support, and have done that in a whole handful of ways, whether through their behavior, through recommendations to other people, whether just directly saying, hey, I need some support here. So we recognize that, and we look at that as it being going to the ICU, having a surgery of some sort, or some real serious intervention that needs to be taking place. So with that, we think about everybody who leaves, say, a surgery, either they go on to a medical floor after that, or a critical care floor, or wherever it may be, working their way down back home, or even if it's just physical therapy or some type of ongoing care after the surgery, after that intense medical experience. Exact same thing as with wilderness therapy and this whole process. We really like to look at wilderness therapy and these 8 to 10 weeks, let's say the average 8 to 10 weeks, as being that surgery, that initial assessment, that initial intervention, stopping what's going on, preventing the hemorrhaging, the bleeding, if you will, establishing a foundation of support, establishing some stability, and then doing a really good assessment of what's needed from here on. What's the next step? Like, how can we best serve you, your family, your student? How can we best serve the optimal health and how to gain optimal health? Once again, with the ICU analogy, you don't take somebody from a surgery and ICU and just say, okay, here's a little bit of medication, you're good. And maybe you can heal, maybe you'll get back to 70% if you just go home or just go on to no more care after this. Continuing care means that you're going to try to get somebody back to optimal health, back to functioning where they were at their 100%. And we're trying to do the same thing for you guys. So recognizing that this is a big process and really ultimately caring about the people we work with, caring about you guys, caring about your family and your students immensely, trying to make recommendations, trying to take interventions and steps to really support everyone in the process as best we can. And it can be pretty challenging, so working through that together. We say about 3/4 of our students, 75% or so, go on to aftercare, but 100% of our students need ongoing support. The point that you've made the steps to take this first intervention, this first therapy experience program. Maybe you've already gone through a couple, and this is another attempt at something. Whatever it may be, things typically are pretty serious at home, or pretty serious in the environment that they're in. And that when you leave here, there's probably needs some therapy that needs to go on after this. So we say everyone needs ongoing support. And whether it looks like an aftercare, it looks like a boarding school, it looks like a wraparound at-home setup, let's just get that concept going. And even referring to that, even talking about that with your student in the field, that this is something's going to happen after wilderness therapy. You're not just going to come back to high school or come back to the same high school without any support, any care they had before. It's very realistic. We also talk about, you may hear that, the mountaintop experience. So your student's been in a incredibly therapeutically rich, structured, intense program, and they're doing great at the end of it. Most of the time, they're doing really good. They look really solid, look really great. Well, typically what happens is that you leave that environment, you leave that sense of confidence, that sense of self-esteem in this setting, and you go to a different one, or you go back home, or wherever it may be. And there's a fall that happens with that. There's a come down that happens with that, kind of postpartum situation. Some people refer to it as, the 90 days of darkness, or off the mountain peak, time. And one concept of helping with that, helping somebody come down from that, the come down of this is having a safety net, having a support structure underneath them, around them, to help catch that fall and get them back into a higher level of functioning. Research shows that people reach a certain level in wilderness therapy. Those who go on with no ongoing care, over time will get back close to where they were when they were out in the field. Long time, maybe not all the way, but within reach. Those who go on with ongoing care, whether aftercare or whatever it may be, get back to that plateau, that high point they get to in a much faster, much more effective, cleaner, safer way. And so this is why we recommend this so frequently, and that it may seem like you're getting this from every angle, but there's a reason for that, and it's not because we're trying to just keep you back in programs. It's because from years of experience across the board, across programmatics, it's really effective. So let's keep going. Let's see. Okay, great question. So just had one pop up here about how many adolescents go to aftercare opposed to young adults. And really, I don't have the numbers in front of me, to be honest with you. However, my experience is that it's about the same. I'd say maybe a little bit more towards the adolescent side, because they don't have, the young adults often can say no. They can say that they are refusing, or they have a little more freedom or liberty in some way with that, whereas adolescents often have more, there's more motivation for them, let's say. They're not as independent. And so typically I'd say maybe leaning a little heavier towards adolescents. But I'd say across the board as recommendations goes, it's very similar. It's less about age and more about the condition, more about what's happening with them clinically. And I'd say the end result may vary just because of the age difference, but as far as who is fit for it or who needs it, there's no real difference in that. Hopefully that answers your question, VM there. So, okay. Like I said, if you guys have questions, please feel free to write in. I'd love to entertain as many as I can tonight with you. Let's talk about the stages of change a little bit. This comes at you at Wellness Weekends. It comes at you. Dr. Paul Case did a wonderful presentation about this. It's another webinar. If you haven't seen it yet, I'd really recommend it. But we're looking at stages of changes here as far as phases, okay? And so we have pre-contemplation, and we'll just do a quick overview here. Pre-contemplation is before you even know there's a problem, before you need to make a change, right? You haven't really thought about it yet. It's kind of obvious. Contemplation, something pops up on your radar, you recognize you want to do something different, okay? Starting to realize there's a problem, starting to realize it's just something that needs to be changed or something you want to change in your life. Then we go to preparation. You make the initial steps for that. That may be calling a therapist, setting that appointment up. It may be researching, wilderness programs like we've already done at this point. That'd be a preparation stage in your own journey through this. Action would be taking those first steps, those first actions of making the change, really doing it, initiating that momentum that you're looking for. Maintenance is obviously, like it says, maintaining that change. That could look like for a day. It could look like for just a moment of time, a month, a week, whatever it may be, a year. Really try to set that new behavior, that new way of thinking into practice. And then inevitably there's a relapse in it. So there's a little backslide. We kind of, we talk about coming off the mountain, same kind of concept in different scales there. So one thing to think about too is relapse can happen through any one of these stages, not just the last. This is, nothing in life is linear, or very few things in human experience are linear. And so thinking about this as a non-linear approach, all these phases can intertwine with each other, but typically it follows these paths here. And we're looking at wilderness therapy, and it's really, as far as the students go, and also the family, really trying to make changes in life. We're kind of, pre-contemplation, contemplation phase, preparation, beginning to do preparation. Maybe you're tiptoeing at action sometime. Really what we look at is that kind of middle area there. And in order to get that true action, that true maintenance of the new growth that we're all looking for is it kind of goes on further down the road and a little more long-term, what's continuum of care concepts. Let's see here. So, one question that we often get is, when's the right time to take these steps? When do we know for certain that my student needs aftercare or something? What do they need, right? So typically a student shows up the first week or two, and often the therapists are going to know after a pretty quick, short amount of time, just based on experience and repetition in this, what's it going to look like, what's the likely outcome, and what their recommendations can be like. So, it's week 1 or 2, and let's just say that it's week 1 or 2, and the recommendation is made. Well, let's say it's week 3 and 4, maybe even 5, that you guys are milling it over as a family. Maybe you're talking to your home therapist, maybe hopefully talking to your education consultant about it, and then say it's week 6 or 7 or 8 that you finally make your decision. Well, that can be a pretty quick timeline sometimes. We really like to recommend that, I say here, the difference between a crisis and a plan is preparation, right? And so getting yourself set up as best you possibly can in a timely way as much as possible. So that being proactive in this. If your therapist says, hey, we're looking at aftercare of some sort, let's get the ball rolling. Well, that means making sure you have an education consultant already. Maybe it means having that dialogue with them. Maybe it means you're already looking at programs from the very beginning. You're looking at a range of programs for the potential outcome. You're only setting yourself up and your child's future up for success, rather than having to make a hasty decision down the road, which could be, it ends up being kind of a last minute thing sometimes. Even if you're trying to be proactive about it, things take longer than you may think. There's a couple of factors that can be playing that will draw things out. Even just getting the admissions process rolling sometimes at an aftercare you choose can take a couple weeks. And so really want to look at that and trying to be as best you can on that, making a solid plan rather than having to be in a place of reaction, which I'm sure many of you have been coming from for a long time, just trying to keep up with what's going on in life. And it can be very exhausting. So trying to turn those tables a little bit. I say setting up plan B, C, and D, right? Or C and D. Often plan A hasn't gone right. or this is plan A, but still, what's the step after this? What's the step after that? And trying to look ahead quite a bit. So you're doing your due diligence, and you're doing the best you can as far as your own research, your own knowledge base for making a great decision for your family and for your child. And that's why we say really trying to be proactive around these things. Once again, giving yourself weeks rather than days to make a decision. I can't tell you the different level of stress that's involved, and different level of sense of hastiness and uncertainty that comes into play when it's week 8 or 9 and you're trying to make plans and trying to make aftercare setups and what if this and what if that, and can we do this, can we do that, when it comes down to graduation. And that's so hard. It's so hard for everybody involved. For you, for your student, for your therapist, for your education consultant, for everyone involved, it's difficult to do that. And so trying to set yourself up in the very beginning, it's only going to benefit you. And I know that many of you are just catching your breath. There's a process getting your student into this program, to Open Sky, that it can be kind of daunting to think about starting all over again. But that's kind of what we're asking you to do, and for a very good reason, though. So just once again, something to kind of mull over for yourself. Education consultants. Let's talk about that for a little bit. Let's talk about them for a little bit. I say your guides in the wilderness of choices. The concept of education consultants. There is a sea of programs out there, ranging from one side to another side, and they can vary greatly in quality, from quality of experience, quality of the right fit, quality of the minutiae that we're going to be talking about in a little bit. And really what education is, I'm going to jump around here on the slide, but what education's job is, or work is to provide an objective, informed, and effective opinions, or options, and opinions for your family. Bringing them in, there's a lot at play in this, and really having someone in your corner, having someone bringing them into you for you, even when you may not think you need it. There's extra costs associated, there's extra interviews or time associated, all these factors, and it can be an incredible ally for you to have. Here's the thought of, at the end of your duration, at the end of 8 to 10 weeks, when this is all over, you don't have access to the Open Skies therapist anymore. Maybe you have a home therapist, that kind of thing. But who do you have in your corner? Who's going to maybe act as that safety net, or as that buffer, that person who can kind of help in a pinch that you may not be planning or anticipating? It can be a really great ally for you to bring into your court. So just a thought for you on that. Cost is a huge consideration in all this. I totally recognize that. That's one of the number one things that we really explore with families through all this, because it is a lot of resources, a lot of expense, or can be at times. And so, the real cost of the right fit versus the wrong fit. Bringing somebody on who's an expert in this kind of thing can end up saving you a substantial amount of money through this process. Let's say several times over their fee, or several times over the contract that you work with them. And even more so for your student and your family's experience. Say program A looks pretty good, program B looks pretty good too. One ends up being the almost right fit, one ends up being the right fit. And navigating those two choices can be immensely difficult from home. Even if you're really proactive and you're going interviewing the programs, that kind of thing, not having someone in your court, it can be really challenging with that. Someone described it once as representing yourself in the court of law, right? Maybe for minor infraction it's okay, but a bigger scenario, it can be a really poor choice. And so the same kind of thing. It's like we're talking about resources financially. We're talking about your student, your child's experience, whether it be a positive one, a really beneficial growth experience, or one that builds a lot of resentment, a lot of frustration, and kind of waste of time and a waste of tuition. And education consultants will know that, or they'll be your guide through that process. Their job, they go out, they interview, they visit programs frequently. They can be very involved in this process, and really having their feet on the ground in every program, having a good sense of which therapist is where at different times. That changes. How's the clinical director? What's the program's integrity like? What type of student population is there? And in any given moment, what's the reputation as it changes through times? Because that happens. A lot can happen in this world, and in the world of therapy in a short amount of time. And it's their job to have that finger on the pulse and to really make a helpful decision recommendation for you guys. So, and there's a reason why you hear it from admissions, from me right now, from your therapist, is because it makes a huge difference. And we really strongly encourage you guys to look into that more if you haven't already. And lastly, how to know the difference between a good web design and a good program. Doing your own research at home can be really challenging. And so often it's a website, right, that you're looking at, or maybe making a couple phone calls. But the difference between a good program, good website designer is just that. Just something to consider as far as where and what type of information you're getting, and what access do you have to quality, important information around it. Okay, so let's talk about programs a little bit. Let's talk about the spectrum of choices here. And there's quite a few. Excuse me. I think that the first thing I want to say is this, that it's a spectrum, okay? And that we have a list here, from residential treatment centers all the way to back home therapists, right? And to know that it's not A, B, C, and D, once again. They all kind of bleed into each other for a host of different reasons. And so some residential treatment centers, which are typically known as maybe more structured, more therapeutically intense environments, they can be more challenging and more confrontive, have a certain reputation. And maybe say an emotional growth model, which could be more around self-esteem and social skills and these types of things. Those are two greatly different programs. One of the biggest designations of what a program is based off licensing in that particular state. So in which state requires a program to be called what based off of what they're doing and how they're doing it. In the back of my head, I know of a program that really sounds a lot more like a therapeutic boarding school, and almost maybe kind of into that emotional growth program. I remember hearing recommendations of that before and being like, wow, interesting that you're going to recommend a residential treatment center. And to learn more about it, and this is back in the beginning when I was doing this work of learning about that really it was a way more liberal, more open, less restrictive environment than I would think. But it's just basically the licensing and the titling of it more than the programming of it. So don't get turned off by what recommendation of what, but more so ask yourself, okay, why is my therapist recommending these? Why is the education consultant recommending these types of programs that they are? And that's the real questions to ask, rather than getting caught up in what type of program the name is or the title is. But just as a quick overview, and once again, this is not to be defined, this is not an absolute answer, but just kind of a quick touch on all these. So once I said residential treatment center, typically more, could be more behavioral focused, more of a more structured, a little more therapeutically intensive intervention program, for certain types of diagnoses that really would benefit from more of that type of setup and that type of structured environment. Therapeutic boarding school, moving down, is just kind of like what it sounds. It's a boarding school that has a more of a clinical therapeutic approach to it. Meeting with therapists, there's groups there. It's more maybe focused on certain diagnoses. Different programs will be oriented towards different strengths, different type of populations they work best with, and they often more recommended for adolescent students, just because of the high school completion, that kind of thing. Maybe bleeding into some of the late adolescent, first year college folks who need to go back a little touch up. Emotional growth model I talked about before. It's maybe a little bit more social skills, more self-esteem building, more enrichment, those types of things. And once again, none of these are absolute, but just kind of a concept of how that moves down and how it can shift a little bit. So totally can be based off an assessment, totally based off of diagnostic criteria, and a certain presentation would not benefit at emotional growth, but would benefit at residential treatment, and then maybe a different one is for therapeutic boarding school, and kind of melding them all together to the individual's needs, trying to pick out the best setup for them. An independent living program, you're looking at typically more young adults, late adolescent type of student who is living outside the home or maybe is nearby the home, and is potentially like in a collective home, a collective house, an apartment complex, kind of a dorm setting, and they're teaching these young people how to thrive in their environment, how to thrive in their communities, whether through college settings still or through a work setup program, a work trade kind of thing, just giving people wings basically to take flight that maybe they're having to struggle with prior. Transitional living program. Let's say a student goes back to their community or near their community. Maybe it's a different town or community nearby or some other part of the country, and you want to have that support there. You want to have some type of more intensive kind of wraparound support, maybe some one-on-one counseling, one-on-one mentoring, even every day, a couple hours a day to start with, let's say. And that's going to be more your transitional living program. And it can be really beneficial for different, once again, different types of folks who need that type of intervention, that level of care. And then finally, we have here do-it-yourself home wraparound services. So this is more of, let's just say, it really kind of puts the onus more back on the parents, and typically puts the parents or the family back into the role of holding boundaries, accountable for treatment, accountable for care. And it really can take an exceptional child, an exceptional student to return back to that. A highly motivated one, and just a really dialed setup back home. I've seen a handful of families try this, and some with a little, some success. It can be really challenging, and often I feel like parents at this point want to shift from holding those boundaries, shift from being accountable for the outcome of this place, of having your child or student come back. And it's kind of nice to have someone else take those reins, and maybe not. Maybe you're someone, or you have a setup where it can be really beneficial to kind of make your own. But you're basically trying to create an aftercare situation at home with all the programming, all the intervention, and the supervision that they would get somewhere else. And maybe that's appropriate, but just kind of know that can be pretty challenging. So we talked a little before. We talked about kind of giving you some insight into why your therapists are recommending, or your education consultant are recommending, these different levels of care, or the different factors they're kind of in the back of their head thinking about. And so thinking to start with, what's the level of care your student truly needs to start with? Let me read this question for a second. Great. That's so we have a question here about what kind of care is there for a 24-year-old who's already graduated from college? Are most of these programs for dual diagnoses? Awesome question. And with having just really a couple pieces of information in the question, it's hard for me to say. That'd be a great question for your therapist or education consultant, to be honest with you. There are great setups for that kind of scenario. The kind of that young adult, a little bit past college, just needs to learn how to spread their wings a little bit, how to fly a little more. There are great opportunities for that. And the dual diagnosis piece, that's going to be really depending on the particular program they're going to go to, and even the particular therapist or counselor they may be working with. Is that their specialty? Do they have experience with that? And so they are out there. There are good options for that. Specifically, I don't, I can't make a certain recommendation without having the background stuff. But it'd be kind of be more that transitional living, independent skills setup, and depending on the complexity, diagnose that kind of thing, it may be more of a more involved situation. So it's hard for me to answer. I'm sorry, I can be more clear with that. But I'd say talk to your therapist. They are good options for you out there. So back to the level of care concept, right? So what kind of level of care does your child truly need? Is it more intensive? Is it less intensive? Is it is it more clinically oriented? Is it a little lighter on the clinical side? And then the word truly is really in there, right, y'all? I know that this can be a really hard thing to navigate. It can be really challenging to kind of figure this out. And I think part of us all want to believe that your sons or daughters can thrive on their own and can be really great on their own, and they can be. And sometimes it means there's still some support and structure that's needed moving forward. And that's kind of the thing of like, what factors are playing into this for decision making, and what type of emotional experience you're coming out through this. So just something to be aware of on your end. Moving on, the spectrum of clinical intensity, right? Is this something that is a program where this question here, we just read, maybe needs a little more clinical intensity, maybe needs a little more involvement where there's more regular contact. Let's say in a therapeutic boarding school setting, is there every day you have a therapy session, a one-on-one therapy session, and there's 4 hours of groups, peer-oriented groups. Or is it, you have 1 hour of individual therapy and maybe an hour of group a day? Just kind of some thoughts about here, and this all changes per person. Program size and the child's needs. So does your child, someone who's going to benefit from a smaller setting, like say, a house full of 6, more of a family kind of nurturing setup, or they're really going to benefit from the social aspects of, say, a population of 100 students of dual genders? It can really range greatly. And so that's something to think about and consider, because different programs will have nuances that will provide different things around this. How long and how much intervention is needed? That's another factor too. Is this a 3-month just kind of wind down post wilderness therapy graduation safety net catch, or is this like an 18-month intervention that's a little longer to let that maintenance phase to take hold a little bit more? So just some factors in this too. It can vary greatly, and once again, that's why this all gets kind of complex through this, and why we recommend that you really consult some folks who have a good sense of it. Let's see here. Okay, great. Excuse me. And once again, guys, if you have questions through this, please shoot them out. I appreciate Maggie doing that. Anybody else has anything, I'm totally available. Hopefully, can be of some help for you. The question is, for family programming, good thing. And as a family therapist, that's a lot of my orientation, and I'd say yes across the board. But once again, what type of family programming? So this slide might be better, or this line might be better written. What type of family programming is a good thing? Is it intensive, every 2 weeks you come out, or is it maybe every couple months, or is it you have a 3-day stay, or is it phone, or it really can vary immensely between the different setups, and also for what your family's needs are. Do you guys need to have just phone calls for the first couple of months, or is it better for you to be there in person, having workshop weekends regularly? It can vary greatly. What about home visits, right? A home visit is a good thing, and different programs will have different setups for this. Some will require the first 3 months. Some require the first, a certain level or a certain, level of participation, wherever it may be. It can really vary quite a bit, and so just something else to consider about if that's a good thing or not. Peers versus staff holding the mirror for your child. Is your child someone who benefits best from their peers reflecting back and really holding them accountable and creating that real positive social peer networks, peer social encouragement? Or do they really appreciate having a mentor, having a therapist or a staff do that for them, or a little bit of both? That's a factor to think about. And then, finally, the temperature of the fire I've written there. Does your student do well with stress? Or does the student do well with the high academic expectation as well as a therapeutic expectation? Or do they do a little better with a little bit more relaxed, less stressful setup that might be a little more self-driven, a little more self-motivated? And that can vary greatly too, of course, right? So which one of those would be the most appropriate for you guys as a family, and for your child to move forward? Okay, I kind of joke with this, but if it were just that easy, right? So that's kind of the foundation questions that we have that we move forward as a clinical team, as clinicians thinking about this, and also for you guys to think about the different factors of aftercare or continuing care setups. But on your end, and this is maybe just as important, what degree of awareness do you have about your own process? Right, this is a huge decision, or it can be sometimes for everyone, and it can be really a really amazing one too to make. It can be an incredible opportunity, incredible experience for your child and your family. This growth moving forward. And so, what other factors are there, and how much awareness do you have of that? We discussed the concepts of emotional versus cognitive decision making. And coming from your heart, does it feel good? Or your mind, it just makes sense, right? And not that one's better or worse than the other, but there should be a nice balance between the two. And more so going back to awareness of it. Having a good sense of what's coming up for you, why and when, and is one battling out or trumping the other one is important to know about. Just your own self-awareness around it, right? Are you afraid that your students or your child's gonna not like you as much, right? Or is it just obvious that this is the right decision, or that you can't decide if it's the right time or not? I mean, there's so many factors that come into play. Just being aware of what comes up for you through all this can be huge. I think it's really common for parents to make it difficult of really wanting to believe in your son and daughter, and wanting to believe that they can do good, that they can do this sometimes on their own, and that's really common. And once again, is that playing a factor in, is this a good thing for you or not? Once again, I just reiterate, knowing your own fears, your own scars. Maybe, do you have some abandonment in your past? Do you have some concerns about that happening again for your child? Are you afraid that your child's not going to love you as much, or they're going to feel that you've turned your back on them? Did you say at one point it was you're going to go out for 5 weeks, then you're coming home, and everything's great, and then now you tell them it's 8 to 10 weeks, or they learn that it's 8 to 10 weeks in reality, and then now it's like, oh, and there's aftercare. So there's this on thing that often happens with parents. They feel guilty or they feel intimidated by that, and just to know that what's coming up for you, and are you procrastinating through this process? If it's been recommended at week 2 that you start looking at aftercare and making choices around education consultants, or talking to your education consultant you already have around it, and you don't do that till week 6, like, why? What's going on for you around that, and where is that level of procrastination coming from, and how is it serving you or not? Just coming to some better terms for yourself about it. What if it's not a clear choice? That's huge, right? So what if it's not a clear choice for you? You're really on the fence, and you're just kind of really challenged by it. That's a good question, and that's really where you're going to just be evaluating the facts, evaluating what's being presented to you, talking to professionals about it, talking to your family about it, and just exploring what's going on. And maybe it isn't a clear choice even up to the very last moment. Maybe that's not your decision is not validated or affirmed till after the fact, maybe a year or 2 later. But can you sit with that fire? Or what if it is? Then what do you do? What's next? Or even more so, what if it's a clear choice, does it bring up factors that maybe you're just kicking your kid out or something, or you're giving up, or whatever it may be? Is there guilt around that? Shame or whatever it may be that can come up for you as a parent or as a family? And that's very real and very common. And just wanting to consider that as well in all of this, because there's a lot that goes into this. Okay. So, when to involve your child and how? Big questions here. First thing we always recommend is talk over with the therapist. They're the people who know your child the best in this process, of course. And so, talk over your education consultant, talk over your therapist, get some input about how to do it and when to do it. There can be some real precision with that, and I recommend that to them. Recommend you to consult them first. But when it is time, when it does seem right, I suggest that you introduce the idea in your motivations. Introduce the idea to them, let them know why you're thinking about it, and once again, the motivations, really resourcing what you've been told, looking at the evidence, looking at the information you're getting from the therapist, looking at the information you're getting from your student in the field, looking at the advice and experience from other families in a program, perhaps if you're on the Sunday night phone calls, from your education consultant, all these different factors, sourcing all that together and just building up the facts in your mind about this is what we're moving forward with and why and how to do it, right? When all that's ready, that's going to help you be direct, clear, and honest as possible. I say that because beating around the bush and sugarcoating this is not going to help your student in the field. I can't tell you how many times I've been out as a guide or as a therapist or working with families where the students, the parents have tried to rescue their child from the reality of, hey, even though you're succeeding, even though you're trying really hard, we still need you to continue this care of growth. We need to help really solidify the changes you're making, and just being honest about it, saying this is what's happening, this is what we're doing, and these reasons why, and doing it as soon as possible. So there's time to digest it. There's time for them to come to terms with it and to go through their grief process, because inevitably there is, and often there is. The grief of, oh, I'm supposed to go out to the beach house with my friends for spring break, or I'm supposed to go to prom, or I'm not graduating from high school, or from the high school I've been going to. I'm losing my friends, whatever it may be. What does it say about me? What does it say about you guys as a family? All these different things, like all this judgment, all these different pieces. Like, it takes time to process through that, and so give them time for that. And do it in a way like beating around the bush, dragging it out. We may be doing it, we may not be doing it. It can be really torturous for students out in the field. So once again, under the tutorage of your therapist, get their opinion. But once inevitably a decision comes down, just be honest with them. They really appreciate it out there. I said that there's few places better than the field to process this for the students, and they're already talking about it. It's common dialogue, it's common conversation in groups, because 3/4 of the students are going to aftercare. Very few showed up thinking they were. That's conversation, and it's groups that are being held in the field. The guides are processing that, the therapists are processing that, and so it's part of the dialogue out there. And just know that it's a safe place for some tough news sometimes. How much to include in the decision? That's another big question too, right? I think that's probably once again a question for your therapist, and also knowing your student, your child. Is it a young adult who is really motivated to continue on this path and to keep changing and to grow? And maybe that person is more involved in where they're going, and rightly so. They deserved it. Or maybe if it's an adolescent or even young adult too, who is less motivated, less excited about the concept, less willing to make a mature, rational decision or valid input, reliable reporters, we refer to it sometimes as. And so maybe they're less involved, right? But just think about that gauge of how much input you want to get from them, how much freedom and liberty you want to provide for them. And sometimes, that would be just as simple as a wants and needs list. What do I want aftercare? What do I need at aftercare? And it maybe also be as involved, typically can be as phone calls and researching pamphlets and program brochures and that kind of stuff that we can help provide. And it can be good to have some involvement. And once again, sometimes it's not indicated. And then another part of this too is just understanding the confusion or the rift that can happen between this whole process. The battle between the ego and the superego, between the part of them that really wants to thrive and the part of their deeper consciousness that really wants them to be very healthy and optimally healthy. Between their ego of like, I can do it on my own, or there's nothing wrong with me, or that I don't need this. And there's this balance back and forth between the two. This battle that happens, and even for your own selves. Was it, once again, is there guilt that comes up? Is there shame? Is there excitement? Is there opportunity? Is there feelings of making the right decision and knowing and trusting your gut that this is a good way to move forward? The conflict that can happen through this whole process can be great. So having some awareness around that too. Okay. So take the next step. Once again, gain understanding about your process and your motivation for seeking ongoing support for your child, right? Know why you're doing this. Know that it's going to be helpful. Know that it's indicated frequently. And why is it? And knowing about the different choices, the different layers of how to make an informed decision and presenting that and knowing it for yourself, right? It makes it so much easier. So incorporate all these different factors to it. Think about these things. Know your motivations. Know your own process. It'd be really great. Talk it over with your family. Talk it over with your spouse. Talk over your home therapist. Your open sky therapist. Your education consultant. Whatever support you have. Your girlfriends. Your buddies. Whatever it may be. Gain information. Gain resources because you have them out there. And look at that. And make sure about what you're doing. And once again, that's the timing piece. Give yourself time to be certain about your choice in this. And keep your long-term goals and perspectives in mind. Is this, is it a thing of, hey, I'm making this choice. I'm sending my kid off to this program because I want them to like me still, or I want them to, not think that I don't love them or whatever it may be. Or am I sending my kid off to this program because I want to punish them still because I don't think they've done their time yet, right? But more so, keep your goals in mind of what are you really trying to have? What are you really trying to achieve in this process? And often I think it's the ability for your child to grow into a sense of satisfaction, deep satisfaction with themselves in life, and a great capacity that they truly are able to achieve and deserve. And so looking at that 1 year out, that 2 year out, even more so that 5, 10, 15, 20 year out outcome, and trying to figure out how to put the steps in place for them to do that on their own right now. And trying to build an experience, trying to build a setup for them that's going to help reach those long-term goals. And not look at the short-term gain out of this, because that can sometimes kind of get in the way of it. And then once it's time to do it, reach out and start the process one piece at a time. It's a process, right, guys? As you all probably know, dabbled in this or looked at this already. And so just remember that you have support through this, and so to use it. Just one chunk at a time, one bit at a time. It's an immense amount of information. It can be a challenge, but start chipping away at it right now. Next week on your phone calls with your therapist, and it's not so daunting. It's not such an overwhelming experience. So, just one way to set yourself up for success around that. Okay, that's it, guys. Thanks so much for joining tonight. Just have a little bit of time here still at the end for any questions. If some of you guys have some that pops up, please feel free to write in here. I just want to say I really appreciate your participation this evening. It says here, it speaks volumes to me, and I'll speak for myself and as part of the Open Sky community. We care greatly for you guys. You care greatly for your children you entrust us with, and for your families. I know it's a really difficult time, a difficult process. It's very complex, complicated. And I just really appreciate you taking the time out of your Monday night to join this presentation. It means you're really committed, and thanks so much.